Welcome back to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters. And as we continue the march towards training camp, we're looking at our positional previews. Make sure to check out our videos we did on the interior defensive line and the edge positions if you haven't seen those already. Today, we're going to be talking about Howie Roseman's favorite position, off-ball linebackers. Coming off a year where the linebacker position was one of the worst units for the entire team, they went out to fix the issue by signing Devin White. And to add to that, they brought in names like Zack Baun and Oren Burks. But Eric, is this really going to change the Eagles' fortunes around at the position? Is this a unit that you can get behind? Are there any strengths to this unit?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. So I would say relative to last year, one of the strengths would be mobility. Just Morrow and Cunningham overall just were not athletic players, and then you had guys, random linebackers coming in. Actually, Ellis was highly athletic, but he has no idea how to play. And then, yeah, Dean obviously got hurt. Am I missing someone?
Shaq Leonard, did you bring him up already?
Oh, no. So, yeah, that was funny because I remember it was the second game he played. He had like one or two highlight plays, and people were like, I told you Shaq Leonard isn't garbage. And then by the third game, people were like, okay, he actually is completely cooked. So it's very hard to go down. I could say that because the bar is as low as it can go. And White is definitely way more mobile than anyone they had out there last year. And I think his coverage abilities, specifically being manned up on running backs, carrying tight ends on seam routes, and playing in short hook zones, I think he's better at that than what we had last year. As we mentioned in the Dean episode, even if he maxes out his potential next year, it's probably not a game-changing player. I think you hope that he can just be solid, improve his coverage instincts, and continue to be effective in the run game. So it's hard to say that it got considerably better than last year. So so I guess my answer overall is there's not that many strengths, and I don't think they're greatly improved. But they were an active negative last year, and there's potential that they could be more of a neutral this year if they're coached correctly and play up to their potential.
Yeah, they to start with your last point, if they're coached up to their potential, the Eagles defense started off decent in some areas last year. Now in other areas they struggled, especially as they were working on a lot of second, third, even some fourth string corners at the time. They dealt with a lot of turnover in their back end, but they still were decent in the first half of the year. And then for whatever reason, just the coaching fell apart. And I attribute that to a lot of their downfall last season. So hopefully with better coaching, everyone performs better as a team and as a unit. Hopefully the linebackers perform better as well. But I agree with you. The strength of this unit, I would definitely say, is athleticism, especially more so compared to last year. Kobe's not the best athlete at the position, but he's not a horrible athlete at the position. There's definitely slower linebackers. Trotter's definitely not a top tier athlete at the position either. But other than that, White is a high end athlete. They brought in Oren Burks from San Francisco. He is a fast mover. Ben VanSumeren should, I don't know if he's going to play more, but he should at least take a step up in his playing ability if he does get some time this year. He's a more athletic linebacker than pretty much anyone they had last year, other than himself. And on top of that, Zack Baun, who is looking like is really fighting for that linebacker, for a linebacker one spot. He's a much better athlete than anyone they had at the position last year. So just pure athleticism is definitely an upgrade over where they were last year. And I think it's an important thing in Fangio's defense because they want to force passes underneath. And if you're going to force passes underneath and rally to the football, you need guys that can close space quickly and they should be much improved in that area going into next season. And I'll add on to this as well in terms of one of their strengths. I would say depth is a strength, which I think is interesting to hear when they don't have a lot of high end players at the position to begin with. But I don't think it will drop off as quickly as it did last year once you dealt with injuries to Nakobe Dean. I think while they're not as good on the top end, I think they have a little bit more experience and a little bit more, some players that you can kind of roll with or feel a little bit more comfortable rolling with if there are some injuries at the position. So I would say depth is a strength. It's just that the difference between who's going to be starting and who's going to be the backups, I don't think is that great. So if someone does get hurt, I don't think your defense takes a huge hit. Now we'll see what happens going into next season if that were to happen. But moving on to weaknesses, what do you think is some of the weaknesses of this unit overall?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned depth. I agree with you, but I see it kind of. I'm not saying you see it differently than this, but it's kind of like the backups are just as good as the starters, and that is a weakness because you want your starters to be bona fide starters. So the top end talent is just not there. That's a clear weakness. Size is to me a big weakness. Now Burks is huge, but everyone else is small. White. So the thing is, okay, I looked into it after the previous podcast. He is 6 foot, but he's so barrel chested with super short arms. Effectively, his wingspan is very stunted. And Nakobe Dean obviously is a small linebacker. Trotter is a very small linebacker. So that to me, that's a weakness. You're not gonna like Cunningham was big. He was 6'3". I don't know if he weighed 250. So he could come in, take on bigger blockers, make tackles against, bigger players. And that might be missed a little bit. Some of that physicality, especially in the interior, like inside run plays. Those would be what stood out to me for weakness.
Yeah, and I think it's a give and take with what Fangio wants from his defense. Do you want those bigger linebackers or do you want those faster athletes? And I think with the way that they play coverage, the way that they play with their front, with their defensive line, that I think they can afford to go a little bit lighter. Just with the way that they can kind of cancel gaps, or they can have some of their guys up front really clog some lanes or take on some hold blockers an extra seconds to give their guys the ability to get into position. But I agree with you. This isn't the biggest linebacking unit. If you get a team that is really committed to the run and getting downhill and able to get up to the second level, that's going to be an issue for this team. And especially because I think that I think that they may go lighter than usual. I think the strength of this team, or especially on the back seven, is going to be more in their secondary as opposed to their linebackers. So I think you may see some more lighter personnel groupings like dime, or some big nickel groupings out there. So if teams are committed to running the ball and can get up to the second level, I think that could end up being an issue for this team. Now, I think if they're facing teams that are committed to running the ball, I think they'll bring in an extra defensive lineman and really try to clog the gaps up front and let those smaller guys kind of roam and work free on the back end of the defense. So size is definitely a weakness, and just a big weakness is that they don't really have an impact player at the position, a guy that's gonna make those. Listen, there's a handful of plays every game that really flip the game for one team or the other. We just didn't really have that last year, and I think you saw it a number of times. I think Morrow dropped like 3 interceptions. He bounced off of off a fumble that was rolling in front of him. No one else was really making a ton of plays that really were putting the defense behind the sticks, or putting the offense behind the sticks, or getting the ball back for the offense. I don't know if they really have a guy that's going to do that. Is going to be a big impact player for them this year. Devin White has gotten his hands on the ball, a few times over the past, few seasons, but he's kind of hit or miss in coverage. And I just don't know if this is going to be a unit that is really leading the defense. It's going to be more so their front and who they have in the secondary now are going to be the guys that you rely on to make those impact plays.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about is like, oh, someone's gonna have to get the tackles. And I was looking at the defensive roster, and I was like, it's gonna end up being like Blankenship, because what other volume tacklers do we really have? You know, so I was like, you look last year, Morrow almost had 100 tackles. Well, those have to be replaced by someone. Do I think N'Kobe Dean's gonna put up 100 tackles? No way. Devin White, yeah, he probably just by default he'll end up getting a bunch of tackles. But I think a lot of them they're just going to string a lot of run plays to the outside, and Blankenship's going to come up. I bet he could end up with like I don't know 80 plus easily. Um, so yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and one of the things you mentioned about playing lighter personnel packages, something I thought about a lot is having Sidney Brown and Cooper DeJean play like a quasi linebacker on a lot of these like passing downs or run pass downs where they could do either. Maybe I don't know if you have opinions because Brown was kind of playing like a wild man. I wouldn't say he's disciplined in like run fits or anything like this, but I'm all for bringing more defensive backs on the field because that seems to be where the talent is as opposed to the linebacking room. But if other teams identify the Eagles as someone who's can only stop the run in 5-man fronts where they're stacking the box, they will punish them. And I believe the stats support this. We're starting to see a little bit of a rebirth of the run game that kind of showed up a little bit last year, and that could potentially continue next year. Any thoughts?
I don't know. I think the NFL is going to continue down its path of trying to run the ball more, especially as teams continue to try and defend the run with light boxes. The NFL is getting better at defending the run with light boxes. But again, as we continue to see NFL defenses and linebackers uh, get lighter, I think we're going to see defenses or offenses continue to try and load the box. Now, Fangio, he is pretty creative in what he will do with his players in terms of stunting the defensive front, bringing in pressures, trying to play from forward down looks, but slant their guys so that you kind of get what's known as odd spacing, which really forces the run to bounce outside. He does a number of different things in the run game where you could use guys like Sidney Brown or Cooper DeJean in creative roles where you are maybe not necessarily playing them as linebackers, but you're blitzing them in ways that can really present the offense different looks and attack you on the ground a little bit differently, or you kind of present one look to them, but then you take it away because you send a blitz. Fangio does. I mean, he's been around the block, so he has answers for a bunch of different kind of offensive attacks, bunch of different offenses that you'll see. Every week he'll change his game plan. I mean, they have their base core fundamental plays that they use, but he changes week to week what his plays are and what his game plan is. He's not a static. We're going out there and we're only doing this kind of defense. He gets really creative and how he uses his guys. Now, speaking of how they use their guys, their linebackers, I mentioned it before, but blitzing is going to be a big thing for the Eagles linebackers. Fangio has come up under a defensive coach. He coached with for 16 years. I mentioned the last episode, and Dom Capers, who was one of the grandfathers of the Fire Zone Blitz. Fangio came up under that system. He's going to send a lot of pressure, whether he's sending pressure from whoever's playing in the slot, or he's sending pressure from players walk down on the line of scrimmage or lined up in the box. The Eagles linebackers, or excuse me, Fangio's linebackers blitz at the 11th highest rate in the NFL last season. And so that's something that I think is going to fit into N'Kobe Dean and Devin White's skill sets, and that I think some of their best attributes is their blitzing. But that's just one thing that I think you'll see more of from their linebackers this year is just how often they're going to be blitzed. Did you have any other thoughts on Fangio and how he likes to use his linebackers? Anything that stood out to you?
Yeah, I didn't think it was anything groundbreaking. Uh, just in terms of the duties they're asked, and based off the personnel we're gonna have, I'm a fan of that. They was not asking them to drop into deep coverages. He was not really asking them to cover quick slot receivers, and so that's good. Um, I One of the things I noticed. So you mentioned fire zone blitzes. The idea behind this is you want the protection, the offensive line, in conjunction with the running back and tight end, potentially to have to account for a certain number of possible rushers. So they may have to devote more resources to blocking a potential blitz, or they may have to slide their protection. Ultimately, you can then have them devote more resources towards stopping your blitz, which may or may not even come. It may just be fake. That's what we talk about when we say sim pressures. And then you can keep the same amount of players in coverage. If you watch the Ravens last year with McDonald, they probably did that at a higher frequency than anyone in the NFL, where they're pretty much almost every passing snap, they're having random guys up at the line in different orientations. Anyone can come. And that was giving fits to the offense, especially when you have great personnel to pull it off. That's really when it becomes maximized. If you just try to trot out any Joe Blow and run these fancy sim pressures, it won't work. If you try to do what the Eagles did last year, which is they bring in Shaq Leonard and like Morrow mugging the A gap, and then they drop back every single time, that's also not effective. You have to mix it up. You have to actually bring the blitz sometimes, even if you're like, okay, there's no way my middle linebacker is going to be able to beat this center or guard. You still need to make them respect that look. And the good news is, as you mentioned, Dean and White are good blitzers, so they will have to respect those looks, and that makes them more effective. And Fangio will be much less predictable in when he actually decides to bring people. So to me, all that bodes well in terms of masking their weaknesses just by restricting their duties, and naturally how he likes to use his linebackers seems to be a pretty good fit with the skill set of those guys.
Yeah, and by being able to blitz those guys, like I don't think Nakobe's I think his weak point in his game is his coverage. We touched on it in his individual episode that we went over, so check that out if you haven't seen it. But if you're able to blitz him, they're versatile at other positions. There's a reason why Fangio likes to be versatile at edge rusher is because he can mix and match the guys that are playing in coverage, or he can drop guys into coverage to kind of give himself advantages in certain ways. So I think it just bodes well for this defense to have guys like Dean and White that can blitz well because it allows you to still do a good job bringing pressure, even if you're dropping one of your edge rushers who are going to be one of your better pass rushers on this team. So it really helps with Fangio's versatility and what he likes in his defense. Now, we've mentioned Dean and White quite a bit so far today, and I think the consensus or the odds-on favorite to be the starting linebackers or starting two linebackers for this defense is Dean and White. But if it isn't Dean or White, who do you think would be the next guy up, or who do you have your eye on to be the guy to potentially be a starter for this team?
Yeah, I know no one will agree with me, but I actually think Oren Burks, specifically because he's highly mobile. He's much larger than the other linebackers. He's a legitimate 6'3" with a good wingspan. He was rubbing elbows with Fred Warner and Greenlaw last year, so maybe he's able to pick up some things from those guys. I scouted some of his college tape and I liked what I saw. Now, if you go and look at the Super Bowl last year where he was forced in there because Greenlaw, it was Achilles, right?
Yeah.
He had that Achilles injury. Yeah, he got roasted. So if you just look at that one game, maybe you think the guy sucks. But looking at other games he played, because he's what, about a 4 or 5 year veteran? Is
Yeah, something
that
like
right?
that. Yeah, he's gonna be 29, I think.
He looks pretty solid to me. Um, he moves well. He can tackle. He seems to have a decent football IQ. He can maintain gap integrity and run fits. Yeah, he's a little bit on the older side for someone with not a lot of starting game. He didn't start a lot of games in his career, but I think he like you mentioned, he brings a lot of depth to the team. I think he's fairly reliable, and White, like we said, he has had a roller coaster career. Dean's always injured. Then you got a rookie and a guy who was an edge rusher. So it's like, is it possible this guy comes in and brings stability? I think very much so. So if I had to pick a surprise starter, that's who it would be. How about you?
Yeah, so I'll touch on Burks. He's a very athletic player. Like I mentioned at the top, strengths of the unit is athleticism. He brings speed in spades to this unit. So again, like we talked about with Fangio's defense, he likes to have, force everything underneath and rally to the ball. He's a guy that can definitely close space quickly in the run game, or excuse me, in the pass game. And that shows up in the run game as well. He's able to play sideline to sideline very quickly. His burst and his acceleration jumps off the screen. He's able to keep his shoulders square while he's scraping across the formation, which allows him to square up on ball carries when he hits them. And when he does hit guys, like he brings his pads with him. So he's an intriguing prospect. I will say that he does struggle getting off blocks, and that's a big negative on his game. I don't think he's the most nuanced when he is in pursuit. There's times where he's trying to outrun an offensive lineman, and he's not that great at either understanding the leverage, whether he needs to take the high side or dip underneath. I think he could be a little better with that. He sometimes he'll run himself out of plays, but overall, I think when it comes to taking on blocks, he struggles a little bit. Now, the good thing with the Eagles' defense is they do a really good job with their techniques and how they play of tying offensive linemen up at the front, and then or they'll use line movements to kind of pin offensive linemen or free up their linebackers so that they can scrape unblocked. So a guy like Burks, I think, can excel in a Fangio defense in the fact that he does protect his linebackers a little bit more from having to take on blocks. I think there's a reason why they did target some smaller, undersized players that are very athletic to fit on this defense. But I think, if there's going to be a surprise guy to start for the team, I'm going to take the chalk right now and go with Zack Baun. If you look at, word coming out of OTAs, he's rotating in with the first team linebackers. So it's him, Dean, now that he's working in from his injury, and Devin White. So to see him playing this much early with the starting unit, I think it bodes well for his chances. Then you look at, you look at what Fangio said when he was first asked about linebackers for this team. The first guy he said was Zack Baun, and then you look at the Eagles website, they list him as a linebacker, not even an outside linebacker, just a linebacker, which is where they list all their other off-ball linebackers. So I think they're really, while he does have versatility to play along the defensive line, I think Fangio wants to use him in a certain way, and I think he wants to use him as an off-ball linebacker. Now, I think he is a guy that can, on passing downs, can come and line up for you on the defensive line and run a bunch of stunts and twists and games and stuff like that and provide versatility that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up starting. It's very limited tape on him as an off-ball linebacker. A lot of it is him as an edge rusher. But you do see things that you like on tape from him as an off-ball linebacker. Like the rest of the guys we've talked about, he's also a good athlete. He has great speed to pursue and chase plays even from the backside. He fills gaps quickly. He does a really good job when he's asked to a technique called stack, track, and fall back, where essentially you're stacking on top of the defensive lineman in front of you, and then you're falling back with the running back as they cut back. And he just plays with good technique overall. You can tell he came from a good coach in Dennis Allen. He's a well-respected coach. He just plays with good technique overall when he's taking on blocks. He's a little undersized, but he plays with good leverage, square shoulders, good inside hand placement with tight elbows. Really helps him to play with as much power as he possibly can. But there's some downsides to his game. And you can kind of see his eye discipline is lacking at times, which I think really comes back to just not playing a ton. There's just little things where you can tell that his lack of experience and playing time, it's a hindrance a little bit. But there's a lot of the good thing. I was really surprised at the limited reps he had on tape on just how good he looked. I thought he was going to look out of place, but I mean, even in coverage, he was a smooth mover, could gets his drops quickly, and then he could break and close on passes underneath. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up as a linebacker day one. They seem to love the guy, and that would be my pick on who could be the surprise.
Yeah, I got enamored with him as an edge rusher when you brought up him absolutely eviscerating Penei Sewell on that ghost move. I was like, this guy had a lot of production in college as an edge rusher. He at least once can be the best right tackle in the game. And
Whoa. Second best right tackle.
Well,
Second.
one of them is becoming into their prime, and so and he beat one of the best right tackles in the game. And then I went on to some of like the Saints forums, and they go, this guy is not an inside linebacker. He only played like 50 snaps in that position, and I don't know if he had a few standout plays that were bad, was why they got that perception. But to me, he's not a needle mover. Because Burks has a lot more position or experience as an inside linebacker and Baun's pedigree as an edge, I think that's why I'm predicting Burks has a better chance. Now, if you're just looking at what's happening, first team reps for Baun, yeah, obviously that's a leading indicator that he might be first in line to try to win that job. But to me, I kind of perceive it as they want to see what he's capable of. Because like you said, there's not that many snaps. And I have this inkling that Fangio wants to give everyone a chance with the ones just to see how they look. Because some of the guys are victim of circumstance, especially with the new coaching staff, where they're only with the 2s and 3s and they can never show off any of their skills. So that may be the case. I'm totally speculating on that. And one of the things we brought up about Baun is he might be the $1 million version of Van Ginkel, who started off as an inside linebacker for them. And then after Jalen Phillips got hurt, he moved to edge. And if you have the poor man's version of that, that could definitely be valuable.
Yeah, I think he's going to play in some facet. There's just too much. There's too much momentum behind him and everything that the Eagles have kind of come out and said on what they believe with Baun for him to just not really have a role. I think it's pretty much a lock that, I mean, they went and got him day one of free agency. You don't see teams typically go out looking to sign guys like Zack Baun on day one of free agency. So I think they really liked what they saw in him. And just he's gonna play at some point in some capacity. Now, one other guy I wanted to talk about is Ben VanSumeren, who got to a little bit of playing time towards the end of last season. I think he's a name that a lot of people are on the lookout for, especially when you look at his athletic profile. You take a look at that, and it kind of gets you, salivating over what he can become. And especially like we mentioned in a Fangio defense, he loves his athletes at linebacker, and especially being able to cover underneath, shut down those areas where teams are really trying to target underneath. He's an athlete that you would envision and picture could fill that role. I do think he is a guy he was an undrafted rookie free agent last season. And I do think he is a guy that probably isn't going to be a starter this year. He's going to be more of a project player, but I think you saw some flashes of what he could become, especially in the Giants game last year. When he saw a hole and wanted to fill it, he got downhill quickly and in a hurry, and he could get sideline to sideline. But I just thought he just was unsure of himself a lot last season. He was picking the wrong gaps a lot of times, or he would start to go downhill towards the wrong gap and then try to get back into the right gap. Overall, I see him as a guy that just needs more time, but I think he's an intriguing player that if he can get some good coaching, I think is a guy that can make an impact in the league somewhere, whether it's for the Eagles or not. But I think on special teams as well, he is going to be a guy that is a player, whether that's on a punt team or kickoff team. I think he is a guy that is going to be on the field in some capacity.
Yeah. I mean, these are the type of players that you like to keep on your roster as you develop them. They have athletic tools, and you get him with the guy with Fangio's experience. Now, I can't imagine he's going to be like spending one-on-one time being like, all right, we really got to get this VanSumeren guy cooking. But, it's a funny thing. The guy played 50 snaps last year, and his big highlight is playing good against the Giants, who are a poverty franchise. So, I wish the best for the guy. I think he could be a good special teamer. And I'd be lying if I told you that he has like chops to be a starting linebacker in the NFL. It's possible. I just don't think we know that much about him. It's one of these things where it's going to come down to his development. So this is where like the position coaches really tend to matter. By all accounts, they almost cleaned house for position coaches. They brought in almost a full new staff, and that might be an underrated change for this upcoming year, because yeah, you can come out like, yeah, maybe you don't have the best personnel, maybe you don't have the best scheme, but if the position coaches are really getting the guys honed in on the little techniques, the reads, just understanding their leverage, what their responsibilities are, all those little intricacies, that can go a long way. And so for a player like VanSumeren, that to me, that's the difference maker, is like if he's putting in the extra hours and getting some help on the finer points from the position coaches, then yeah, maybe he could develop into something. I don't have, I'm not projecting him as being a guy who's getting any meaningful snaps at linebacker next year. But who knows? It's a wide open room.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured it is a guy we just needed to touch on because he did start a couple games last season, or get some playing time, some significant playing time in a couple games last season. So it's a guy we got to touch on, and he's an athletic guy. So, and he's working with the second team, it appears at the moment right now. So just to kind of give people an idea of what the pecking order is through OTAs, and again, this is very early in the process, so take everything with a grain of salt. But like you were saying, and partly, thinking about with VanSumeren is, I think he was a little lost as a rookie, not totally unexpected, but when you just look back at the team's collapse last year and see how everyone across the board took a step back, it's just hard not to look at the coaching and think that played a major role. And for an UDFA like VanSumeren, I mean, I feel like that plays an even bigger part. And the Eagles really did clean house, and it wasn't just coordinators that they had lost over the past few years. It was a lot of position coaches ended up leaving the team too, and getting promotions elsewhere, or getting promoted out of their current positions into bigger roles. So I think all of that took a hit for the Eagles. Now they've brought in a ton of veteran coaches to go along with Fangio that have good records. So we'll see how that plays out. But um, now I think one other guy we do got to talk about, Jeremiah Trotter. Do you think he's gonna compete for a starting role this year, or do you think he's gonna be more of a backup developmental player?
Definitely developmental. I mean, the draft stock says it all. If they, if they were planning on starting a rookie linebacker, to me, they would have taken someone in the top 3 rounds. Now, because the room is so wide open, it's possible for him to win the job. I'm not ruling that out. In fact, I like the way he approaches the position probably more than anyone else in that room. He has very defined weaknesses. Like, he's just slow. Like, his top end speed is slow. And he's small. Like, he probably only weighs what, 230? Not that tall, not that rangy. Outside of that, he's really good. His instincts are awesome. Football Q, obviously off the charts. Even though he is slow, because he can read what's happening so quickly, he can get a jump start in moving in the appropriate direction. He can move laterally pretty good and shed blocks, even against bigger linemen. And he's good at wrapping up, and he's a tremendous blitzer. He had an unbelievable number of sacks last year, if I remember correctly. So when he got a built up momentum, he would just come in flying, sack the quarterback, and give the big axe celebration. When I was scouting him originally, I was like, yeah, this would be a bad pick, like in the 3rd round. But late in the 5th, I think is where he went. I was like, yeah, I'm all for it. Great story. And he actually has it's clear, it's obvious to just say, look at the pedigree, father of one of the best linebackers the Eagles ever had. He's going to have that inherent linebacker skill set, and it shows up in spades. To me, it's just a question of like, can he do a bunch of like ladder and parachute drills and get those legs more explosive and get a little more horsepower out of them? If all that comes true, yeah, why not? This guy could be a linebacker on the Eagles.
Yeah, and I don't think he's a guy that's going to necessarily be competing for a spot this year. I think they have too many veterans on the team at this point in time that I think they'll be the guys that probably end up winning out definitely early in the season. I know a lot of people look at and say, well, these are veterans that haven't really done a whole lot in the NFL, or like in White's case, he has not played that well over the past several years. But coming into the NFL, especially a position like linebacker, there's so much communication that goes on of not just making sure that you're right in your assignment yourself, but you have to make sure that the defensive line is in position. You have to make sure that you've communicated with the safeties, or sometimes even communicating with the corners. That it's hard for a rookie that's trying to learn the NFL, trying to learn a new system. And it was also a 5th round pick. Those guys don't usually come in and just take starting jobs away from veterans right away. Just even the mental aspect of it, there's a lot that goes into playing the position of linebacker and safety as well. I think it's a little tougher for younger guys to come in and just day one pick it up and play. So for that reason, I think Trotter's more of a long term project for the Eagles. Like you said, I don't think he really has the speed or the athleticism to become a high end player in the NFL, and especially for in a defense like Fangio's, where they're really going to stress you sideline to sideline. They're going to put you in positions where you're going to have to chase guys. I don't think he matches up that well. I just don't think he's that great in coverage. So I think it'll take some improving his athleticism a little bit, and then getting caught up with the NFL game. So I don't view him as a guy that's going to be a day one starter. Uh, so we'll see how that envelops.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you'll see guys where they're like a superstar in college, and by all accounts he was, but they just don't have the size and athletic profile to translate. And you're just hoping that it does, like they can overcome it with like, world class level preparation and work ethic. But sometimes it never materializes. So, to me, at the very least, he could be a special teamer, a reserve linebacker who you're trying to bring up to speed, who ultimately there's going to be injuries. Can he come in and play a few snaps for you and not kill you? I think, yeah, he has the potential for that. I actually think his football IQ is better right now than Devin White's. Now, experience goes a long way. So you could take a guy with a lower IQ who's been in the league 7 years versus a very cerebral rookie, and he still might not match up to him. But White is also in a new defense. So, I certainly agree with you. I don't think there's probably one chance in a million he could win the starting job. Presumably if there's like a bunch of injuries, something like this. But I think he's a nice guy to have on your roster. The trick with him is like, is he ever going to be able to overcome those athleticism concerns? Like, he might be the smartest, most technically refined linebacker of all time, but if you put that in a frame like mine, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying he's so far removed from having like the NFL body and athleticism that it's impossible, but it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, and we made the comparison on the post draft podcast we did. He's very similar in size and athletic ability to TJ Edwards when he was coming out of college. So there's precedent. Like, he's not so small that he can't play in the NFL. But if there's a position where you can overcome that athleticism, it's linebacker. I think the two positions where you can overcome that the most is linebacker and safety, because to me, those are the positions you have to think the most. And if you can't process the game well, it's going to slow you down, and it doesn't matter how fast you are. Go and look up go to NFL.com, look up their draft combine tracker, and look up the fastest 40 times that they have on record for linebackers. And the top 10 guys it's not like a murderer's row of players. It's like a bunch of guys that really didn't amount to a whole lot in the NFL. There's a lot more to playing linebacker than just, can you run fast? Does it help? For sure, but you have to be able to think at that position. You have to be able to process quickly and play in tight spaces, play in confined spaces. You have to be a physical and tough player. There's so much more that goes into it than just being the fastest guy on the field. So I think there is a path for Trotter to become a starting linebacker one day. It's just he does have to overcome some of the odds to get to that point in time.
Yeah, that was something that happened with Isaiah Simmons, because I think he ran one of the best 40s of all time.
He's in that top 10. Right? So is Devin White.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And didn't they try to move him to safety or something crazy?
I don't know. They moved him all around to different spots. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it was a complete failure. And I think he suffered from exactly what you're talking about. It's like he had speed for days, and he's really long. And so you're like, oh, this guy's a chess piece we can put anywhere. And it just never materialized. He didn't have the right skill set to play like a stack linebacker.
Yeah. Now, looking at the roster and going into next season, do you think they're going to add anyone to this unit? Do you think there's anyone on the free agent market or potentially trade market that you have your eye on?
To be honest, I don't really think there's anyone out there. During the offseason, I was enamored with Blake Cashman. I thought he looked tremendous on film. He signed for quite a bit of money with the Vikings. So, no, I don't think they're going to add anyone to the group. It's a little bit of a misnomer that Howie doesn't value the position. It's more so that he'd rather allocate resources towards other positions. And so that just becomes a casualty in that sense. So in a perfect world, you get a guy like TJ Edwards where you pay him peanuts and you get solid production. Now, they paid a little bit more for Kaiser White, so there is precedent for spending a little bit, and he was solid. I think linebackers are important. If you look at the top 4 defenses from last year, you can use any metrics you want, but by all accounts, Baltimore, New York Jets, Cleveland, San Francisco. These are all up near the top. These teams have not just one, they have at least one great linebacker. Some of them had multiple great linebackers. Now, of course, they had great secondaries too. I've been harping on the fact that you pretty much need a good pass defense if you're going to try to win the Super Bowl. That's been evidence for several years now. And that's why Howie invested so much in secondary in the draft. Because he goes and looks, we're 29th in the league in pass defense. All the teams in the NFC and AFC championship are like top 6 or 7 teams in pass defense. Well, we have to be able to shrink that gap. And on that note, Devin White helps you in pass defense. It's not just your secondary, right? It's everyone who could possibly play in coverage. And in today's NFL, you're having nickel is played more often than the base personnel packages. So pass defense is paramount, and the linebackers are getting smaller and more mobile to be able to suit that role. And now it's going to the point where they're replacing them with safeties. So you're seeing even a lot more big nickel. And if you have the guys to pull it off, like these Kyle Hamiltons, Brian Branches, there's other players, that can be a real weapon for you.
Yeah, and I'd add Kansas City to that list of the top defenses. They're really good last year, and they have a really strong linebacking unit. You can't build a good defense and ignore linebackers. You just it's part of the defense. Like the defensive line, you build your run fits to fit the run in certain ways to feed the linebackers or to feed your second level players so that they all can play together. Your linebackers have to play and fit into your coverage in a way that they can be an asset and not a weakness as well. Like they all work in together. You can't ignore a single position and think you can just overcome it by having better players at other positions. Now, you might value certain positions more. That doesn't mean that the position entirely is unimportant. It just might mean that in Howie's view, I think he thinks that you can find comparable linebackers at cheaper prices, and sometimes it works out, and you get TJ Edwards and Kaiser White, and sometimes it doesn't, and you get Nicholas Morrow and Zach Cunningham. Now, speaking of guys that the Eagles could bring in, Zach Cunningham's still on the market, and I would bring him into camp, just another body to compete. I think you know what you're getting at this point in time in his career. But again, I don't know if Fangio wants that. It kind of be a downgrade on the athleticism front that they're looking for out of their linebackers. Cunningham's definitely a little bit on the slower end. If we're looking towards teams where they might look for a trade partner, I think that doesn't come till the season when teams figure out if they are competing or if they are tanking, or if they're going to be out of the playoffs. So I don't see them necessarily adding anyone in a blockbuster trade or moving someone like that. And I don't think they would give up big assets for a linebacker anyways. I think it would be a future 5th round pick to get an aging veteran that can potentially help out the team. So I don't think we're going to add anyone in that sense. It'll be someone like Zach Cunningham if they add anyone going into camp. But I think they have a solid group of veterans to compete with some of these younger guys, and you got a good mix that I don't think that they necessarily need to go out and add yet another veteran. So I don't think they need to add someone else to the unit. But thinking of this unit in a long-term sense, the guys on the roster next year are currently Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter, and Brandon Smith, who's likely going to be a practice squad player. So it looks like Howie is going to need to invest some resources into the position. What are you thinking about this unit in the long term?
Yeah, definitely they're going to need to invest some draft capital. I'm not quite familiar with which linebackers might be available in free agency in 25. They should have a little bit of money to spend at that time. So that might be one of their bigger investments. We talked about it. The offense is mostly locked up for the next several years, and the same with the secondary. So I think we can expect to see investments in the defensive line for sure, and presumably linebacker. So I just have to do some more research on which players might come available in 25. Now, the other thing is the shelf life of the linebackers. It can go south quickly. Like I remember a couple years ago, Anthony Barr was a free agent, and I really liked this guy when he was in Minnesota, and the Dallas took a swing on him, and he was cooked. And we saw the same thing with Shaq Leonard last year. So you just got to be vigilant with these guys. Just because they had really good years in the past, it can get sour fast. So in that sense, we saw a little bit of a youth movement in the off starting this off season. I think Howie does definitely have an eye on the future in that sense. So if they are to bring in a free agent linebacker next year, my guess it would be on the younger end, just so you can secure that core for a little few more years. One of the threads throughout this team for the last several years has been discontinuity. Oh, Hurts has to have a new offensive coordinator. We have a bunch of different defensive coordinators. We have this rotating carousel of linebackers and slot corners, even safeties. So I think there was a little bit of extra focus that the front office is like, okay, let's try to just secure these pieces. Even if they don't play perfectly in the first year, give them some time. We see that in the NBA all the time, where it can look like it's not working. Oh, we got to move on, and you just stick with it an extra year or two, and it can work out because it's hard to have continuity in the NFL. So if you have that and good injury luck, just that alone can take you a long way. And we know the Eagles roster is one of the more talented in the NFL. So I think really emphasizing continuity is conducive to success over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point in the fact that the Eagles are pretty much locked up on the vast majority of their positions going into next year. I don't think we're going to see them big spenders in free agency. They don't really have the cap space for it, which is probably a big reason why you didn't see them go out and spend a ton of money at the position this offseason. A lot of these guys are getting in the 10 to 12 million dollar range in their contracts. The Eagles have something like depending on the website you look at, 11 to 17 million dollars in cap space next year. And if you look at the way the contracts are broken down, signing a linebacker this year to a big money contract, their first year payout would have been, like $3 to $4 million. It's that second and third year of the contract where the money starts to escalate. So that would have really kind of hurt their flexibility in free agency and building the team next year. So if they do spend money on at the position, I think they're more likely to do it next year, where the first year of a free agency deal can really be reduced, and then it escalates later on in the life of the contract. But I do think also it could be the draft where they're throwing resources at the position. But I do think they're definitely going to do something to try and get some more players in. Obviously, they're going to just need to for depth and to get bodies in here. But Nakobe Dean will be at the last year of his rookie contract, so they're going to need an answer beyond Dean. And we don't even know if Dean is the answer, and we don't know if Trotter's the answer. I don't think you want to rely on a fifth round rookie or a fifth round player to just be like, well, this is our answer at the position going forward. Fifth round players just generally don't work out. So I think we would hope to invest a little bit, a little bit higher at the position, or invest more money in free agency or a potential trade. So I do think they are going to try and upgrade this position. I don't think they're going to roll in with Dean and Trotter as the expected 1-2 punch next year. I think it's going to be somebody, but a lot of these guys they brought in on 1 year deals. White 1 year deal, Baun 1 year deal, Burks a 1 year deal. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And to your point about continuity, VanSumeren, he could develop into something at that point in time. He's a really good athlete, and if you look at there's always a couple undrafted players that develop into something. The Eagles just signed one in Bryce Huff this offseason. Who knows? Maybe VanSumeren develops.
Especially at linebacker. There's so many first round busts, and now NFL refuses to draft linebackers in the first round. Um, And then there's guys who go in like third, fourth round who turn out to be studs. So that's definitely possible. Now, this is my little pipe dream. Levante David only signed a 1-year deal. Now, he might just retire after this year. I think this guy is incredible. He looked more limber than some 27-year-olds out there. So, who knows? Maybe if he wants one last Super Bowl run next year, we could sign him for like the vet man. So
Yeah, I feel like he's a lifetime Buccaneer. I feel like, I mean, I don't know. He's just been there so long already. I just don't see a guy like him switching up teams. If he wanted to go ring chasing, I felt like he would have by now. But it would be fun to have
yeah,
him
he
on the
would have
team.
left.
Yeah, would have been fun.
Yeah, he would have left this year if he was going to leave. Although they did give him $8.5 million, which is pretty amazing for a guy of his age. Cashman, you mentioned the some of the deals that these guys got. Cashman, I think, got 10 mil. Van Ginkel got 10 mil. Patrick Queen got 13 and change.
Luvu, what'd he get?
So,
I thought he got something like
yeah, 10 plus over 10. Yeah, well, we could talk about the Commanders offseason because that was not good. But
well, we'll save that for another day.
I think we covered our bases.
Yeah, I think we're good on linebackers. Everyone's favorite position, the position that nobody's going to be mocking to the Eagles in early 2025. Kidding, but we'll see how this position develops and plays out. I think it should be a better unit than last year, and I think it should be definitely a more athletic unit. So I don't think we'll be complaining about it being a slow linebacking unit for the first time in several years now. So, but we'll continue on with our offseason breakdowns in our future episodes. Make sure to like and subscribe and let your friends know about the podcast so we can continue growing. And until next time, take it easy.